Good morning, everyone.
Good
There are
morning.
early birds who are already here. We'll start the webinar in just a minute, but thank you all for joining. And now I can say good afternoon, everyone. We're now at noon and about to start our webinar about the Maryland State Transportation Trails Strategic Plan. We'll have a presentation first and Q&A afterwards. If at any point a question pops up, feel free to put it into the Q&A so we can have a list when we go into that section. Right. Again, welcome everyone. We are about to be at 12:01, so we're about to get started. There we are. Welcome to today's webinar about the Maryland State Transportation Trails Strategic Plan and our update on our development of the plan. I want to introduce Joe McAndrew, who'll introduce himself to get us started today.
Thank you, Meg, and thank you all for affording me the opportunity to say a few remarks on the suboptimal hotel setting today. But are excited to discuss the trail plan with you. This is truly a labor of love. It's not just a nice to have, but it's an item that our collective team at MDOT has really leaned into. And is excited about what we've got, the teamwork and collaborative spirit across the department, across the state agencies, and with our local partners. We've got a good product that builds on the great successes of the last decade or so since the last plan was done. And we're excited to get it moving. But again, my name is Joe McAndrew, and I am the Assistant Secretary for Project Development and Delivery at the Maryland Department of Transportation. Our vision for the state's trail plan is to strategically move towards a safe and accessible transportation trail network that connects Marylanders to opportunities across their communities, towns, and throughout the state. We say strategically because this has to be done by aligning our state and local priorities and providing resources for overcoming our barriers. And although this project is a strategic plan and not necessarily focused on an individual project, we want it to lead to the advancement, the rapid advancement of real projects. And for that reason, I'm excited to share some news about two big developments for trails that show our commitment at the Maryland Department of Transportation with you all here today. First, we just rail banked a new corridor. Rail banking isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do and not always the right thing to do, depending on the demands on the rail asset. But when the opportunity presents itself, it's a great opportunity. And we recently rail banked our fourth corridor in the state of Maryland. Only a few weeks ago, MDOT finalized a trail use agreement with Dorchester County, where we are well into the design of creating a transportation trail for 14 and a half miles where a rail line is currently inactive. This would connect places like Cambridge, Preston, and Hurlock. Additionally, the first section of that trail, the Frederick Douglass Rail Trail, is also being designed. The future trail could extend along the eastern shore from Easton to Tuckahoe State Park and eventually to the Delaware state line. For this project, MDOT is using Federal Highway Administration authorized funding through the Carbon Reduction Program to look at feasibility, as well as the first iteration in design and alternatives. And we're going to be working with many folks on this call, as well as our local community partners, to know how to make this potential trail work for their daily lives, but ultimately deliver it, which is an exciting thing for us here at the department. These are two opportunities that we're advancing on the Eastern Shore, but we're looking forward to advancing more opportunities throughout the state. And you're going to learn more about rail banking and our various efforts today on this call. So please stay tuned to learn more about the development of our Maryland State Transportation Trails Strategic Plan from our MDOT project leads. I don't want to steal their thunder because honestly, they're doing amazing work, and it's a collective team at MDOT really pushing it forward. And with that, I'd like to introduce Meg Young and Aviva Clue. I just love this photo. It's great. I really appreciate our team pulling it together, who are doing the hard work behind the scenes to make this happen. Meg Young is the Deputy Director of the Office of Active Transportation and Micromobility here at the Secretary's Office, and Aviva is the Strategic Planning Manager for the Office of Planning, Programming, and Project Development, also at the Secretary's Office. I'm going to now pass it on to Aviva to share more about our plan, but we are really excited with where we're at and where we're heading, and look forward to doing it with everybody on this call. So thank you very much. Aviva?
Thanks, Joe. Hi, good afternoon. Again, my name is Aviva Clue, and thank you all so much for joining us today. Before we get started, we wanted to explain what a transportation trail is. You'll be hearing that a lot. So what is it? What do you think of when you hear a transportation trail? A transportation trail, in short, refers to a shared use path that is part of a transportation network and is open to the public for bicycle and pedestrian use, including most forms of micromobility, from e-scooters to skateboards, and they're often ADA compliant. If you take a look at the photo on the slide, you will see two examples of transportation trails, including a paved shared use path and a paved side path. Those are shown by the green check marks on the left. The scope of this plan does not include non-transportation or recreational trails, which include unpaved trails such as mountain biking trails or hiking trails, shown in the two photos on the right with the red X marks. And again, for the purposes of this presentation, any mention of trails refers to transportation trails. Today's webinar will cover
Sorry, one moment. There's apparently an issue. Some people cannot see the slides right now.
Oh, you can't?
Just
Oh, I'm so
moment.
sorry. Can you see them now?
I can see.
Oh, you can?
I can see it fine.
Okay. Oh,
All
great.
right, we'll directly chat with
If you
people who are
can't see
having
the
an issue then.
presentation, please leave and come back in. We'll make sure that we put you right back in. Thank you. And thanks for letting us know. And please keep using that chat. Okay, so back to the agenda. I hope everyone can see this. Today's webinar will cover the development of the draft plan so far, including highlights of our project team and our technical advisory committee, history behind the plan and its development, an overview of our existing conditions analysis, and development of our transportation toolkits, engagement opportunities, and how you can help with this. Of course, at the end, we'll have an interactive Q&A, as Meg mentioned, and feel free to put your questions throughout the chat, throughout the presentation in the chat. Also, I apologize if you can see me. It looks like I'm glitching on my side. The Maryland State Transportation Trails Strategic Plan is supported by a robust project team from the Maryland Department of Transportation, the State Highway Administration, and our state agency partner of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. We're supported by a skilled consultant team of Cambridge Systematics, Tool Design, and PRR. Together, we have expertise in everything from planning to engagement to trail implementation to support the success of this plan development. We are also supported by the Transportation Trails Technical Advisory Committee, which is a focused subcommittee of the Maryland Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. This group of trail stakeholders and subject matter experts has grown from our first meeting of about 25 members to over 80 members to help us with the development of this plan. They utilize their expertise and networks to provide data and insight on different transportation trails, review and provide feedback on plan content, and assist with our engagement efforts. As you can see on this map, our TAC stakeholders cover the entire state and range from local stakeholders to local government partners to state and federal partners. We also have representation from MPOs and national and regional trail partners. I know many of our TAC members are online today, so thank you for participating throughout this entire process. When we think about the development of this plan, it started much before the kickoff last fall. Momentum and interest have been building since the last Trails Plan was published in 2009. This was a visionary plan setting the framework for how a statewide network for transportation trails can contribute to state goals related to transportation, economic development, public health, and sustainability. Last year, the 2050 Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan was published, and it expanded upon the 2009's plan's vision and developed recommendations based on policies, data analysis, and state goals. These recommendations include conducting an inventory for existing and planned shared use paths, identifying and prioritizing missing links, and identifying tools and partners to complete shared use path projects, including those identified in rail bank corridors. Together, these serve as the foundation for the draft plan. As I mentioned earlier, the plan officially kicked off in the fall of 2024. On this slide, you can see that we have divided the plan into 3 parts. We recently completed part 1, which focused on the existing conditions analysis, developing our shared use path database of existing and planned trails, and creating our website. We're officially now in part 2, which focuses on engagement and, including this webinar, a public survey, listening sessions, and other forms of engagement to help inform the content of the draft plan. The final plan and the finalized database of existing, planned, and potential transportation trails will be completed this summer. To showcase the content in the final plan and the finalized map, we will be hosting another webinar this summer as well. Pulling from Secretary McAndrew's earlier statement that this is a strategic plan, we are focused on outcomes and driven by our vision to strategically move towards a safe and accessible transportation trail network, and that's influenced by the inputs of this plan. As you can see on the slide, we have intentionally created a process where the draft plan is influenced by data, tools, and your involvement. I'm now going to pass it to Meg Young, who will take us through each of these elements.
Slide. All right, we're going to reload the slides one more time because we have heard that there are some issues for some attendees to see the slides. So give me one moment while I reload them to see if that maybe can help fix the problem. But wanted to again say thank you to our Assistant Secretary McAndrew for kicking off this webinar. I think it says a lot, the amount of attention and involvement that we've seen from our leadership. So that's huge. And Aviva has already helped here to explain our process. So we can all see the slides now. You see them on your end, Aviva? John
Yes,
can.
I can see
all
them.
Right.
Yep.
As Aviva said, my name is Meg Young. I'm our Deputy Director in the Office of Active Transportation and Micromobility, and I'll take it from here to explain some of the work that has happened in the first part of our plan development. So the first thing we did was assess existing conditions. To put that in layman's terms, we have to know where we are to know where we want to go. Our existing conditions contained a couple of different parts. First, we did a plan and policy review, looked at all of the existing state plans. Work smarter, not harder. If somebody has already put something in a plan, puts out in a process, we want to make sure we're working from our existing playbook. Looking at all of our policies as well. Then we put together a database of transportation trails, those that are existing, those that are potential and planned. And then we've broken down the trail project lifecycle analysis. So I'll take you through each of these steps and how they are adding up to the existing conditions report. So as I said, the first step, our plan and policy review on your screen. There's a long list of existing state plans, our existing statewide policies. And then we also looked at county priority letters and existing feasibility studies to see where all of this intersects with transportation trails. It makes a lot of sense that the 2009 Trails Plan talks about transportation trails, but trails are also mentioned in our Governor Moore's 2024 state plan, and trails are also included in things like our climate pollution reduction plan. So trails are mentioned in a lot of places, and we wanted to consolidate all of the different goals and mentions of transportation trails by reviewing all of them. We also looked at statewide policies that intersect with trail transportation trails, things like rail banking that was mentioned before, but also thinking of non-traditional transportation trail users, equestrian use in some parts of the state, as well as ownership maintenance standards. Our county priority letters are an annual process where counties lay out their priorities and improvements they would like to see to the transportation network within their jurisdictions. So we also looked at the past 3 years of county priority letters for all of the mentions of transportation trails. And of course, looked at feasibility studies. I wanted to highlight one of the plans that we looked at for the existing conditions report, the 2050 Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan. So this plan was published just last year and has the most up-to-date information on where MDOT is hoping to go to create a multimodal network for people biking and people walking throughout the state. And of course, there are specific mentions of transportation trails and policy and guidance recommendations. So we looked through all of these recommendations, and it was a good place to benchmark ourselves. We already said that these were recommendations, things that we wanted to achieve at the Maryland Department of Transportation. And so now this plan can be even more specific and focused on transportation trails, where the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan may have identified that we need to improve our current standards. This can take a deeper dive into those standards and make recommendations to make sure that the Maryland Department of Transportation is up to date with shared use path standards. The American Association of State Transportation Officials recently released new standards, so that's very well timed with our development of this plan, so we can recommend adoption of the latest and greatest standards. One other way we benchmarked by looking at our existing plans was to see the specific project recommendations that have already been identified and if we've achieved them. Before we set new priorities, we want to know, have we achieved the past priorities? And one of the great things, actually, that we uncovered when we were looking at our existing plans is that the 2009 statewide trails plan had a list of priority projects. And by the time the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan was published last year, there were only 5 remaining priority projects from that plan. That is to say, we achieved a lot of the priorities in the interim, and these 5 remain. And to date, I can actually say we've made even more progress on these projects. The first one listed here, the Jones Falls Trail connecting to the Torrey C. Brown Rail Trail, also known as the NCR Trail in Baltimore County. They actually published a feasibility study just last year, funded through the Maryland Department of Transportation, Kim Lamphere's Bikeways Network Program. That's a mouthful, but it's a state grant program that funds bicycle infrastructure, and through that grant, Baltimore County published a feasibility study last year on this connection. So that is another step towards making this priority project. The WBNA trail towards DC has been ongoing for a long time and phased construction. Very excited that later this year we expect to open up a bicycle and pedestrian bridge that's a key to that full transportation trail connection. The BWI Trail to the Patapsco Regional Greenway, we do have multiple studies ongoing right now with the help of the Baltimore Metropolitan Council to advance the Patapsco Regional Greenway. So again, we're seeing progress towards that project. Number 4 on the screen, the 3-Notch Trail in Charles and St. Mary's County has also been phased so that different parts of the trail can be constructed. Right now, St. Mary's County is working on a phase of the 3-Notch Trail under construction, where they've been pretty innovative with their funding and matched the Kim Lamphere's Bikeways funding with a Transportation Alternatives grant, which is federal funding to advance that project. And then the last one, number 5, the Lower Susquehanna Greenway, and creating a transportation trail, bicycle and pedestrian facility across the Susquehanna River is still outstanding, but I think we expect some news on that forthcoming. So in addition to all of our state plans, we also looked at all of our existing policies, and we just wanted to highlight a few of them. So first on the screen, rail banking, as Joe McAndrew mentioned, we've just rail banked our 4th corridor. Thank you, Dorchester County, for helping advance rail trail on the Eastern Shore. But it's a federal process where a trail sponsor, usually a public agency, can have an interim use for a rail corridor that's not currently active with rail traffic. And so a trail is considered an interim use that keeps a trail corridor intact. In Dorchester County, it's 14.5 miles. So we want to keep that whole line intact should rail service ever be needed again. And because it's a contiguous trail connection, then we are getting real length. So our Office of Rail and Intermodal Freights
objectives, and then I was like, oh, maybe.
Our Office of Rail and Intermodal Freight actually just released a new railroad information manual called Making Tracks to make these steps a lot more clear, and we're excited to include all of that information in our Transportation Trail Strategic Plan. The other really exciting policy that just went through an update is the Maryland Department of Transportation's Complete Streets Policy. Again, just last year in June of 2024, all Maryland Department of Transportation modes, so the State Highway Administration, MTA, our MVA, our Port Authority, our Aviation Authority, and the Maryland Transportation Authority, our tolling authority, all signed on to a complete streets policy. This policy states that all MDOT projects, all projects on the MDOT right-of-way will be subject to complete streets and have to look at multimodal accommodations. What this means is over the course of this year, 2025, our year for implementation, all of our modes are looking at their existing policies, guidance, and making sure that multimodal accommodations are included, and that when a project is scoped, bicycle and pedestrian use will be looked at, and there's only a short list of reasons why that might not be included through a clear and transparent waiver process. I see one clarifying question in the chat that I will answer right now. What is VRUs? That is a vulnerable roadway user. And so you'll see that on a lot of MDOT projects, looking at who is vulnerable on our roadway, and that might mean somebody walking or biking. It might mean a child or somebody who's moving slower because they're using a walker to get across a crosswalk. So generally on the roadway, those are our most vulnerable roadway users, because if you don't have all of the protections that a motor vehicle or being inside of a bus may offer you, literally a steel cage, if a crash happens, it's going to be more severe for somebody who is walking or biking and more exposed. So when we're looking at safety, we need to look at safety for people, right? And not just the motor vehicle that they're traveling in. And that's what one of the objectives of our Complete Streets policy is, to make sure roadways are safe for everyone, no matter what mode you're using. All right, in addition to all of our state plans and state policies, we also looked at cross-state plans and networks to see how our Maryland network fits in. So there's, in Maryland, a wealth of National Park Service trails, important trails like the East Coast Greenway, which is connecting from Maine to Florida, so it passes through Maryland. And many of them also have their own plans, how they want to see these specific trails advance. So as part of this, we looked at how we are currently a part of their networks and where there are currently gaps in these cross-state trails or networks. We looked at regional plans and networks as well. So many counties and regions who are organized by our partners at Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPOs, have their own plans. So again, we want to look at the work that's already been done for building this plan. To highlight a few of them, the Bikeable Baltimore region is an effort undertaken by the Baltimore Metropolitan Council to look at trail connections among all of their counties. So if you leave Baltimore City and you go into Howard County, or you are going from Anne Arundel into Baltimore County, do you have a safe connection even when you are crossing county lines? They did an inventory of the existing network and planned network. So we got to, again, work smarter, not harder, and look at all of their data files and make sure we are looking at the same plans for the Baltimore region. We've also talked a lot about the Eastern Shore, but the Eastern Shore Trail Network is an effort from the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy and laid out a trail plan for the whole Eastern Shore. So they've already started building momentum. They've been working with county councils to vet this plan. So we want to make sure we build upon that progress and have included it in our existing conditions. All right, so in addition to reading through all of these reports, the next step for our existing conditions was to put everything on a map. This is a screenshot of the interactive map that our TAC committee helped us to vet. Basically, they checked our work. We started off by mapping all of the existing transportation trails in this very small screenshot. They're in purple. Those are the transportation trails we already have in Maryland. We then, again, looked at all of the adopted plans from counties and cities across the state and looked at what was in priority letters, and those are shown on the map in red. So those are projects that have already advanced pretty far. But are not yet on the ground. And then in blue, potential transportation trails. These are trails that have an advocacy effort behind them. There's some groundswell. They've maybe been suggested to be put into a county plan or priority letter, but they haven't gotten there yet. And then again, in yellow, our TAC committee reviewed all of this work and made sure to add anything we were missing. So these different layers kind of add up and I think show the intent of this strategic plan in that we want to see something move from being a potential transportation trail, something that a community or an advocacy group says we really need this trail, to then being adopted by the local jurisdiction, becoming a planned trail, and eventually becoming, in this case, purple, being constructed and on the ground. So the purpose of this plan is to show that pipeline. Based on the plans, the policies, and seeing everything that's on a map, the next and final step for our existing conditions analysis, looking at all of the projects that have been completed or are underway in Maryland. There's really 100 different ways you could dice up the process, but consistently we saw these 5 steps on your screen and have called that the trail project life cycle. So by analyzing this and seeing what the different stages are, we're using this to inform the plan and where there's still help needed. Where are local jurisdictions running into barriers, or where's their opportunity to make something more clear? Some of these are ongoing: building support, funding, and maintenance of transportation trails. You'll see our arrows. Those are things that really never stop. Even when something is fully constructed, you still need to have support to make sure it's well maintained, funding to make sure it's well maintained and programmed and used by a community. The two parts of the process that are more discrete and have a start and end are land acquisition and the actual implementation or construction of a trail. So how did we take this and make it into part of our strategic plan? We finished our existing conditions, and this is the part of the plan that we are working on right now: guidance and toolkits for trail implementation. So again, this trail project lifecycle analysis is what we're using as the base for this. And for the two discrete sections, land acquisition and implementation, we've seen how that's included in plans. We've seen references to this in policy. And so our goal here is to make sure our policies are aligned with transportation trails and helping them be implemented, and looking at resources we can provide to make those steps of a trail project life cycle a little bit easier to navigate. For land acquisition, this is often legal considerations. Who owns the right-of-way? Who owns the land where we want to put a trail? And there's opportunities to improve our policies for this. The rail banking policy that was mentioned, and providing technical assistance for planning, for dealing with oftentimes utility corridors are also a contiguous corridor that are prime for a transportation trail. So for each of the barriers and opportunities for land acquisition, we're currently working on policy recommendations, and then again, technical resources for local jurisdictions to use during this phase of the trail project lifecycle. We'll also be including a couple of case studies, looking at projects that have been completed and had to go through this land acquisition step. Pictured here, you can see the Department of Natural Resources rail banked corridor, the Western Maryland Rail Trail. The next part of the trail project lifecycle that we are providing some policy recommendations and case studies for is implementation. So this is everything from designing a trail to eventually constructing it. For this, we've looked at opportunities for implementing complete streets, again, updating our standards for design, providing resources for public engagement during the design process, and we'll be featuring a number of case studies. The National Park Service is one opportunity that provides technical assistance for a couple projects in Maryland. Right now, they are working on project with Chesapeake Gateway communities. So all of the communities that touch the Chesapeake Bay, 14 that have become part of a cohort and are receiving technical assistance from the National Park Service for the implementation of transportation trails. In addition to land acquisition and implementation, as we look at the trail project lifecycle, as we mentioned, there are some steps that are ongoing. We identified building support, funding, and maintenance as areas where our local jurisdictions often run into barriers, and so we've selected these for more in-depth toolkits as part of this plan. The toolkits we're working on right now for funding, it's called Making the Case and Building Support. So this is going to identify planning steps, outline potential allies, and provide some case studies to convey the economic benefits of transportation trails. This toolkit for me has been actually a lot of fun to think about, because transportation trails, we're thinking of at the Maryland Department of Transportation from a very transportation and engineering lens. But when we think about how trails are really improving the quality of life for communities, we need to make sure that everyone is on board. So this has really highlighted a lot of interesting case studies and, unconventional trail partners. We think of potentially like advocates like Bike AAA or Bike More. Of course, they support trails. But the rail trail in Easton also has a lot of support from their local health department, which is located right off the trail. And they've said it has made a huge difference to their employees to be able to travel to work on a transportation trail. We also have talked to, in the city of Frederick, businesses along the Carroll Creek Linear Park who have said, we located our establishment on the trail because of the foot traffic it brings in, and the way people who, when they're just enjoying a park and a trail, are going to stop in and support a local business. So there's a lot of resources that we can provide to make this case and think about the unconventional trail partners. And that is what we're trying to provide the different metrics, the different economic impact from the beginning, so that a community can understand the difference that a transportation trail can make in their community. The next toolkit we're working on is aligning funding opportunities. And so this is how a community can leverage local, state, and federal funding to execute a transportation trail project. Usually, if you can align all of these things, it makes your money go further. And again, we've heard a lot of interesting cases from across the state that we want to highlight. St. Michael's on the Eastern Shore right now is working on implementing a extension to their nature trail, and they are matching local funds through their Rotary with state funds, with federal funds. It's complicated, but with this toolkit, we're trying to make that easier to navigate for anybody who wants to see a transportation trail. Last but not least, we're doing a dive into maintaining transportation trails. This is going to be a look at strategies, costs, and examples for how to maintain trails. We have a number of partners for this. Prince George's County Parks recently updated all of their standards. We also know that there are places like the Friends of Patapsco Valley State Park, where they have an innovative model of volunteer and community days to maintain trails. So we'll highlight different ways that trails can be maintained, programmed, and really drive people to walk, to roll, or enjoy a transportation trail. I just caught myself mentioning driving, guys. We're not driving on the trail. We are walking and rolling on the trail. All right, so with that, I'll hand it back to Aviva to let you know how you can be involved in this process.
Thanks, Meg. So as Meg mentioned, the toolkits are still under development, and we were thinking of different ways that the community and our stakeholders can provide input. And one way is through the Maryland Transportation Trails Survey. We created the survey with the purpose to get information and feedback from not only our trail partners and the stakeholders that we mentioned earlier, but also the general public. The information that we're going to collect will help inform our toolkits and the final plan, but we're asking questions that are both for trail users and non-users. So even if you have a non-trail user in your life, share this survey with them, because we want to know what encourages you to use a trail. How do you get to the trails that you use? What barriers or challenges do you experience? Does your trail have a lot of waste, or maybe there's overgrowth from vegetation? We want to know that. There is also a section asking about your role with trails. Maybe you are just a trail user and an enthusiast, but maybe you have a role for trail implementation. You work for a local government. Maybe you're an elected official. We would like to know your influence and how we can gather that information to put into these toolkits in the final plan. There's a really fun and easy mapping exercise that you can look at the planned and existing trails that Meg mentioned from that database to get your familiarity, to say, do you support these trails? Are you familiar with these trails? And then, of course, there's some optional demographic information because we want to know who you are. There's also an opportunity within the survey to be connected to the development of this plan. We'll ask for your name and email if you're interested in staying informed. The survey is currently open. We've put the link in the chat. We really recommend that you take it. It does not even take 15 minutes. It's best if you do it on a desktop because of that mapping exercise, but we made sure it was very easy to use on both a mobile and a desktop. It'll be open until May 9th, and if you have that survey link, feel free to share it with your friends, neighbors, coworkers. Please take it. We really appreciate it. Have your voice be heard. There's an opportunity in there to, there's text boxes to explain some challenges, to let us know other thoughts. And again, your feedback is so important to us. Here's the slide again, because we really want to show the connection from all these parts that we've been talking about, from the existing conditions to the database, to the survey, to the toolkits. All of this research, communication, all the data comes together to help inform the final plan, which again, we expect this summer. We also are establishing tools, a space for transportation trails to share information. So people from the public, from our partners, they can come and say, where do transportation trails fall within MDOT? We're creating a landing page to share information about the 2009 plan, the MB pack. We'll have a link to that. We'll have links to resources here because we're really establishing our transportation trails portfolio. One element of this plan development that we're doing too is establishing an interactive web page. If you've ever seen those really cool web pages that have different tabs, they have maps, different interactive elements, we're establishing that too as a resource for our trail implementers, for our trail users, and the general public, of course, too. So that should be available by the next, by the summer too. And I think, yep. Okay, so how else can you provide input? We are so excited that you're here today to listen to the webinar, but there are so many different avenues that you can provide input on the development of this plan. Of course, you can take the survey, you can review the draft transportation trails map. We would love any feedback on the proposed trails and really check it for accuracy. We believe that you know your communities best. Please let us know. This is a plan for everyone, and we are so adamant about having correct information. Please join an ongoing advocacy effort. Maybe it's a local group that focuses specifically on sustainability, walkability, bikeability. You can join an advisory committee meeting. You can join our technical advisory committee. Please let us know. Your voice matters, and getting out there is so important. Weigh in on local plans. Local plans help determine what gets funded in the Maryland Department of Transportation Consolidated Transportation Program. So if you think of local repaving or redesigning efforts, that is a great way to show your support and interest for your local trail project. And again, attend those annual CTP tours. Push your local elected officials to have your transportation trail in the transportation priority letter. We have seen it. We saw it last fall. It's been so great to have that public discourse and show that importance. And of course, you can support local grant applications. Maybe you're not in a role that writes the grant applications, or you're not part of that jurisdiction, but a letter of support goes a long way. And a letter of support from the state goes a long way too. So let us know. This is a two-way system of communication as we develop this plan. So we have come to the end. We have seen some great questions in the chat, and we're going to just take a second to read through them, and we have almost 15 full minutes to have the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Aviva. There are a lot of questions. I'm going to try to take some of the ones that were put in first from the beginning. Are projects in planning today also impacted by the Complete Streets policies? And we had also received a question via email about how context-driven and some of our tools for creating complete streets intersect with this plan. So I kind of want to combine those two questions. The Complete Streets policy became effective at the beginning of this year, and anything that has not reached semi-final design or further is subject to the Complete Streets policy. So that means anything that is being scoped right now, anything that only has preliminary design, is going to go through our new Complete Streets policy. They will do an analysis of including multimodal facilities and how to apply. Again, context-driven is really one of our leading guidance documents for implementing Complete Streets. And part of this Transportation Trails Strategic Plan is making sure that trails are included as they're updating all of those documents. But yes, anything that is currently being scoped or planned will be subject to that policy. And if there is a way to include multimodal facilities such as a shared use path or a transportation trails plan, it will be evaluated. There's also a question, the next question, about the Maryland Department of Commerce heralding trails in Maryland as Maryland trails second to none. Yes, they gave a wonderful presentation at our last convening of the Maryland Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee as part of this effort. So they have connected us with the Maryland destination marketing officers and different tourism marketers across the state, really as part of that first toolkit of making the case, because what the Maryland Office of Tourism Development has already shown is that there is a real economic impact from transportation trails. They've done deep dives into some of our really marquee trails, the C&O Trail, and how it really brings tourism dollars to the state. So they are a very active partner, and we are excited to do really a listening session with these tourism officers. All right. The next question, we had a couple questions about utility corridors and land acquisition. I would group together, whereas rail banking has a clear process. It's true that working with utility companies is not as straightforward because there are different types of utilities and different type of equipment. But one of our recommendations from this plan will likely be standards for utility companies, and that's something that has already been in discussion here at the Maryland Department of Transportation with our utility companies of what kind of transportation trails could be put on their corridors that does not impede their utility vehicles and their maintenance vehicles from servicing, our very important utilities. So we have to make sure that the standards work for everyone. And our hope is that by having a standard, it would be clear whether you're in Howard County trying to put in a project in Laurel, or if you're in Baltimore City putting a project in along a BG&E corridor, that there could be a standard that would make that process a lot shorter. David has asked, how are projects followed up on? We have 2 feasibility studies in Cheverly, and they have not moved. So, David, we got your email, and I'm following up with SHA about where that is in the queue for those particular projects. Part of that question, it looks like, and I saw as well, a question about accessing parks and how sometimes it's quite hard to get to a park. Here, you also mentioned the Anacostia River Trail. As part of this project, we are mapping all of the planned and potential trails, and on our interactive website, we intend to share a number of metrics that MDOT looks at while prioritizing projects. Some of this will be informed by your responses to the survey, and then some of them are already set. So safety is a metric that will definitely be on our interactive map. So we can show crash statistics and where there's real need for a safety intervention and how that intersects with potential trails. And then parks and other community resources, I think we also intend to have one of those layers on the interactive map. So things like state parks, education, transit, those are all really important community resources, and a trail that can provide access to something that is important to a community would show up through that layer.
Meg, we have a good one about how the survey and feedback will be collected and incorporated. We'll put two of those together. In the chat, we've been putting that if you have any questions, and maybe I'll go to this last slide so you can see it. We have that web page. You can go to our web page, and we have an email address, nbpac@mdot.maryland.gov. Feel free to email that. If you have the link to the survey, feel free to distribute that. We're opening the lines of communication. We will share it with our MDOT socials. We've been sending it out from our different press releases to collect that feedback to inform those toolkits, as Meg was mentioning. But really, you are helping us be a part of this process. You're helping us by attending this webinar. You're helping us by attending the future webinar this summer to talk about the final plan, but utilize your networks. You have the links, you have the tools, so please share. But we will be doing a big push for the engagement because this toolkit piece is so important. We're not writing just another plan. You know, you hear that a lot. We're all writing plans. Meg listed 15 plans that we're considering because there's so many plans out there. We're really emphasizing the strategic notion of this plan, the strategic plan. So thank you. Great questions. I mixed a couple of those together, Meg.
There's so many in here. Related to that, there's a question about past survey responses to the BPMP, the Transportation Playbook and State Highway Plan. And yes, we are building upon that data, and even on some of those data layers. So we have looked at the survey responses and the takeaways. This survey in particular, again, is just even more topic specific and really gets into transportation trails. The BPMP, which is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, gave us a lot of information about what connections are important. And then this, again, will go a step further to look at some of those potential trails on the survey and can respond directly to that map that we've developed.
And if you have any information that you think should be considered, we've been utilizing our TAC and our other networks and of course those existing plans to say, all right, what feasibility studies exist? If you have information that you think should be included that hasn't already been included, you can email MBPAC and we can put it in there. Evidence is important, that documented need we keep saying. Whether you have your feasibility study, we looked at the priority letters. Show us that construction has started. Show us that you have that support for the trail. And we can help and make sure that's incorporated, whether it's in the database or maybe it could even be a best practice.
A question, will MDOT consider using natural surface trails in natural areas? Many recent trail installations have caused damage, and natural service trails can benefit from volunteer labor for maintenance. So the focus of this plan is mostly paved surface trails, at most crushed gravel, but we are looking at trails which are mostly ADA compliant and can be used to connect to the transportation network. So natural surface trails are not the focus of this plan, but as part of our project management team that Aviva shared at the very beginning of this webinar, the Department of Natural Resources has been involved in helping manage the project and talking about how we can prioritize trails. We are looking at how to connect to some of those natural surface trails. But a lot of the natural areas are not necessarily within the Maryland Department of Transportation purview. But the Department of Natural Resources has been a great partner, and I think they're seeing the importance of trails throughout the state as they are helping in this process.
And I would like to note, we've been getting really great questions in the chat. There's both a chat for the webinar and then there's a Q&A section. We're monitoring both. So if you're having issues, and then if you don't have the chat capability, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. We want to make sure that everyone's questions are being addressed. Thanks.
question about safe routes to schools, and then I see another one wondering if school access is part of the state transportation goal. Under the Moore-Miller administration, access and opportunities for children are I think, a priority across state agencies, and we have taken them into consideration in the development of this plan. Safe routes to schools is part of the Transportation Alternatives Program, administered by the State Highway Administration. And so that will be included as a funding opportunity with some resources about how to apply for and execute that type of grant. But generally, yeah, if you're within 2 miles of a school, it does make those applications more competitive. And that's for transportation alternatives, but also for the Kim Lamphere Bikeways program, which is a state grant program, showing that a transportation trail or facility links to a school is definitely something that helps the application and makes it more competitive. Schools would also be something included in our public places. A quick one, Sonia asked about e-bikes and a proposed law that would require insurance and registration. Excuse me. Which means you are up to date on the state legislative session. That was a proposed bill this year, but it was recently withdrawn by the sponsor. On a related note, though, the Department of Natural Resources is looking at their e-bike policies and which parks are appropriate for e-bikes or where they might not be appropriate. And so I would keep an eye out for their communications. They are also looking for public input to make sure they have the right policies for e-bikes and make parks safe and accessible for everyone.
Meg, you just mentioned schools. There have been a couple of questions about other prioritization elements, whether it be population density or other things like that. Could you speak to any of the other elements like schools that make a trail or increase prioritization for a trail?
Well, that is one thing that's still in development in this plan. You know, as we've said a few times, your feedback is really important, and as we're finalizing those prioritization factors, we want to see those survey responses as far as what are the most important ways to prioritize trails. Other things that have been discussed is, connecting existing trails, connecting to transit. There's really a long list, but our goal is that we show the connection of which metrics would apply for which funds. At the end of the day, transportation trails are only going to be implemented if it is a local priority, as well as our state emphasis on trails. So a community knows itself and where their priorities are the best. And that's why having a transportation trail be adopted into a plan and then a priority letter helps show it's important locally and makes it competitive for funding. So the interactive map will show ways that once you've reached those stages might make it more competitive for state or federal funding.
All right, Meg, we have time for one more question.
Which one's it going to be? I'm scrolling through. All right, I'll go with this one. State roadways are often a barrier to trail access. Does the Transportation Trails Plan make any recommendations about how SHA should support trail connections? This, again, I'll direct you to our Complete Streets policy, which dictates that moving forward, the State Highway Administration has to look at accommodations for people walking and biking. And so what this Transportation Trails Plan is going to do is consolidate all of the guidance for that, consolidate all of the standards so that when SHA is evaluating what sort of pedestrian or bicycle infrastructure might be appropriate, they know that a transportation trail is an option. And it can sometimes be the best option if you have a constrained right-of-way, being able to put in a nice wide shared use path on one side of a state highway that does have room for people walking and biking and for people to pass each other. It can often be the best solution, and having clear standards is something we are developing in partnership with the State Highway Administration.
Thanks, Meg. So again, thank you for attending our webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to email nbpac@mdot.maryland.gov or visit our website. It's www.mdot.maryland.gov/trailsplan. All of those resources will get you directly to us. We can keep this communication going. We're going to record this webinar is recorded, so we'll post it on our website and share the slides with the group. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you at the next webinar this summer.
Thanks, everyone. If we did not get to your question, please send it to us in an email.
Yes, please email us. Like all the thank yous. Thank you.
Some of these thank yous deserve a thank you right back. You know, Daniel, thank you for representing the East Coast Greenway, and Diane for taking us around Havre de Grace.
Okay, I think I'm going to end it. Oh, yep, it just ended on its own.